Just to let you know who I am, who you have in front of you. My name is Massimo Mollica, and I've been serving as a missionary with Grace Community Church, Grace Ministries International in Italy for just shy of 15 years. The last 9 years I've been involved in a church planting ministry in Genoa, in English. Genoa, which is on the coast, right where the peninsula turns towards France. The Lord in recent months has seen fit in his providence to move us on to a new role in world missions. And I will be, we've been back for good into the United States in California since January. And so I'm taking on a new role, actually, out of it, still connected to Italy, but within Grace Ministries International with GMI. And there's all these acronyms we have around here: TMAI, TMS, TMU, GMI, whatever all the other ones. Grace Ministries International, GMI, is the sending agency or the sending arm of a lot of the people who serve in the TMAI schools and do church planting around the world. And it's under the authority and oversight of the elders at Grace Community Church. And so I've been asked to come back to take a role of leadership alongside of and under Rodney Anderson, who's the director of GMI. And so we're really excited about the next phase of our ministry, but just to let you know, we have left Italy just like we're kind of fresh off the boat, so to speak, And so, but if you have questions about the ministry in Italy and how maybe you might learn more, you can always ask me. But I would also encourage you in the exhibition hall, there's a little table where my colleague who I worked with for 9 years in Italy, Matthew Johnston, is down there. At the table for the Istituto Teologico Evangelico Verbum, which is the Latin word for word, Evangelical Theological Institute, and just really trying to give new direction to theological training in Italy. In addition to, we have various missionaries in Italy, and so there's a lot going on. I can talk to you about it. Would love to if you have questions after. But there's also another resource, especially if you're interested in partnering with the ministry in some way. Matt would be the best person to talk to down there in the exhibition hall. What I've been asked to do today in this seminar, they've given me really 30 minutes to give you a quick overview of a particular section of the book that they just handed out to you guys today. And there goes my water. And then talk to you about and develop some of the themes in the little insert that I wrote in this section for the textbook. And give you, what I want to do is give you an overview of some of the challenges that we face in evangelism in Italy that we've seen over the years of ministry there. But let me first just take the textbook out. You probably don't have it, all of you, in front of you. There's various sections. In part one, if you remember, they said there's different, like 3 parts to this book. In part one, there is what's called subsection 2, and it's all about the Great Commission and biblical evangelism. So we're talking about spreading the gospel, the front edge of the Great Commission. And there's a chapter that will really bring together all the various teachings of the New Testament on the Great Commission from Matthew, from Mark, from Luke, from John, from Acts, and synthesize it, as well as there's various inserts that you're going to find that will either talk about how the Great Commission is being distorted. For example, there's an insert on Latin America and in different ways that it's not being carried out, or it's being carried out in the wrong way. There's a chapter that's going to explain discipleship and what it means to actually make disciples. There's chapter 11 that focuses on the actual message of our mission, right? Evangelism is preaching the gospel. And so it's going to focus on what are those non-negotiables in gospel preaching. And it's going to there's also some other inserts that will talk about the importance of repentance, the relationship between conversion and obedience, and then some other challenges faced in South Africa. My insert 12.2, called Evangelizing in the Shadow of the Vatican, falls under chapter 12, which talks about communicating the gospel to all cultures. And so that's why I'm here today, to talk about some of the challenges we've faced in Italy culturally, and then explain to you, maybe if we have time, some of the strategies. And if not, if I don't get through everything, I'm going to say there's also a panel discussion after in which my friend Devraj, who serves in the Philippines, and we'll talk more about even some of his evangelism. And it's actually really exciting. I encourage you to come back for that, because I spoke with him yesterday and was just really encouraged in my own heart listening to him. So there's a couple of inserts in chapter 12. One is on the birth of a church in Southeast Asia, the Taliabu people, a tribe. And actually, this is very interesting for me, because I grew up hearing as a high school student the missionary story of Steve Lanetti and his colleague who took the gospel into a tribe and saw many of the tribe converted in a church planted on an island in Indonesia. And he was an inspiration for me. And he has this insert right before my insert of his ministry there in Indonesia over the many years ago. And the gospel took off there. It's an incredible story. Go onto YouTube, search the Taliabu story. You can hear all about it. My role is to talk to you about a mission field that's not as, let's say, visible in its fruit or its results. If they saw many conversions in the tribe of the Taliabu on this island, Italy is a country where the gospel just goes forward at a snail's pace. It's a very hard country. And then I might also add, chapter 13, we'll talk about evangelizing Jewish people, written by my good friend Marty Wolf, who was supposed to be here today as well, but he's sick and unable to make it. But so that's what you're going to see in this section. It's going to be all about evangelism. I'd encourage you to read that section. But what I want to talk to you is evangelism in Europe and principally in Italy. As I said, evangelism in Italy is a slow plodding ministry. It's hard terrain. I can't remember ever having a conversation with anybody in 15 years with an Italian who was like, oh yeah, this is great. I can't wait to commit my life to Christ. It's always riddled with objections. What about this? What about, how do you explain, this part of the Roman Catholic Church, or this part of science, or how do you know the Bible's not corrupted? You face objections, both intellectual and cultural, at every turn. And so for the next 20 minutes, my job is to try to or 25 minutes, is to try to summarize for you, if I can, synthesize the nature of these challenges that we've faced for many years. And my goal isn't just to say, oh man, we should feel sorry for the missionaries in Italy because it's really hard there, but that you would be moved to pray, that the Lord would soften the terrain of the Italian people, that you might even be moved to go to Italy, or that you might be moved to support ministry in Italy. And so when we consider global evangelism, and you go into a country to spread the gospel, evangelism is really that leading edge, that cutting edge of the Great Commission, in which you preach the gospel and aim to draw people to be reconciled to God and to become followers of Christ, where then they would grow and be nurtured in the local church and then be fit for greater service of our Lord. But as you enter into another country, you are going to want to be considerate of what are those cultural idols, what are those challenges in the country you're going to, created by the religion or the country that might dominate that country. So for Italy, the obvious answer is, what is that dominant religion? It's Roman Catholicism, right? And so we need to take that into consideration. As you'll see on the handout, if you don't have a handout, I'm sure maybe you could raise your hand. There's more. Does anybody not have a handout? Okay, there's a few people out there. If we can get those handouts out. But yeah. So I want to summarize really what I kind of synthesize into 3 challenges that we faced over the years, so that you can understand the nature of ministry in Italy. And I'm going to follow pretty closely the book, my insert in the book, but try to expand on it with some examples. And as I get into these challenges, I just want to say, I have people ask me often, like, what are the Italians like? I'm like, I don't know. I've been there 15 years, but they're all different. Like every single, I've talked about this with Italians. Behind the face of every Italian is a mystery, because they all have different thoughts on the Roman Catholic Church. They all have different opinions. And so you really, as you would in the United States, you need to work and labor to know the person you have in front of you that you're trying to reach, and love, cross a barrier into their life and understand who they are. And so the first challenge I want to talk about is perhaps the obvious one, is Roman Catholic heritage. Roman Catholic heritage. Italy is one of those countries where the national identity is wrapped up in a world religion like Roman Catholicism. And the Roman Catholic Church had it at the time of the Reformation. There was the Counter-Reformation at the Council of Trent between 1545 and 1563. And in the Counter-Reformation, the Roman Catholic Church tragically cemented a faulty view of the gospel as dogmatic doctrine. And various elements were dogmatically defined, including the denial of justification by faith alone, which is the crux of the true gospel, as we learn about in Ephesians or Galatians and Romans. And this was the most prominent denial and confusion affirmed by the Council of Trent in the Counter-Reformation. And we also overlook the Council of Trent also has strong statements about the necessary role of the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church, strong statements about the propitiatory nature of the Eucharist. So there's other things there, but given that the geographical and political center of the Roman Catholic Church lies on the Italian peninsula, this Counter-Reformation cemented the spiritual trajectory for the Italians of future centuries. This denial of the gospel, they were going to be isolated from Trent on from the pure and clear gospel that we can sometimes also summarize in the 5 solas of the Reformation: faith alone, Christ alone, grace alone, Scripture alone, and to God alone be the glory. And so Italian history is both politically and spiritually is inextricably wound to the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church held political power in central Italy for many years. So this unique heritage that doesn't exist in other countries that are Roman Catholic continues to create barriers for the gospel in Italy in the present day. In the Italian mind, the Roman Catholic Church is the historic Christian church. I will have people ask me, Massimo, what's the difference between you and the Christians? And so we are not in the Christian category in their mind. And so, in fact, for years, I heard this recently from another friend of mine who served in Italy, that there was a time in Italian history where the passport said Catholic. So for the Italian passport. So if you're Italian, you're Catholic. So considering another form of Christianity would be unsettling for a Roman Catholic who instinctively wants to be loyal to the Roman Catholic Church rather than rethink their entire identity. And so to be Italian is to be Roman Catholic, and that doesn't mean you have to be a practicing Roman Catholic. They're still Catholic. I've even talked with atheists in Italy who say they're Catholic, which you're like, well, how does that work? As I said, there's some questions I don't have answers to. A dear friend of mine who I evangelized for a number of years in Italy named Giampiero Barone, you can pray for him. I'll tell you his name because you can pray for him. He was my dentist. And the Lord opened up the door to really study the scriptures with him for 7 years. A couple times a week, or a couple times a month, we would meet. And after 7 years, and he was Italian. He'd always say he's Catholic. He never went to church, never went to Mass, didn't go to he wasn't involved in any of the sacraments. And after 7 years of meeting with him, he still would say he's Catholic. And I would say to him, you're not Catholic. You don't do anything that a normal practicing Catholic does. But he's like, but I'm Italian. And that's what Italians are. I was speaking with some other missionary friends even just last week, the other day, about the challenges of church planting in countries in Europe like Germany and England that have become increasingly distant from Protestant and Reformation roots. And the fact remains that in Italy, the Reformation didn't touch it. There's Reformation roots in England and in Germany where there's maybe not as much of a cultural stigma for being evangelical or Protestant as there would be in Italy. We can't say for Italy that there's Reformation roots. Most Italians would be nominally Catholic. The Roman Catholic heritage, though, even if they're not going to church, I mean, there are people that go to church. We have friends across the spectrum of different types of Catholicism, from practicing to going a couple times a year to not going at all, but they're still Catholic. The challenge in Italy is most family gatherings, everything with your family, centers around the events of the church. There's cultural events and holidays that are dictated by the liturgical calendar. There's the Saints' Day for the patron saint of the city. You get school off that day. There's special foods made for those days. Everything in the culture revolves around that. Even your family life, if you think about it, from baptism at birth to first communion in elementary school, to confirmation in middle school, to weddings, to funerals, from life to death, the Roman Catholic Church is present in all family events. And so for these reasons, it's not uncommon if an Italian converts that they would face some sort of opposition within their family. It would be viewed as some sort of denial of their heritage. My dad was born and raised in Italy. He came to know the Lord through the ministry of Grace Community Church here in Southern California in the 1980s. And when he came to know the Lord, his family viewed him as denying his Italianness. Sometimes this fuels, I've heard many stories where this fuels hostility even for years. And so that's not always the case, but it can be the case. And so this creates a barrier to evangelism, to conversion. But Roman Catholic heritage is also it influences how people view you as an evangelical. When historically the Roman Catholic Church is anathematizing justification by faith alone, evangelicals would be viewed with a sort of stigma that would create even social barriers to the gospel where people wouldn't want to talk to you, where people would try to keep a distance from you. Of course, things change from one region of the country to another. And there is currently freedom of religion in Italy, though every school child is required to take religion hour where they go to religion. Thankfully, now, you can't say this for 30 years ago, but now the parents have the option to hold their kids out of religion hour. So our kids went to the Italian public school, and we kept them out of religion hour. What you do see, though, in Italy at times in terms of a kind of a discrimination against evangelicals is on an organized church level at times, whereas it's very difficult to see how do you define a church in Italy legally before the government? What kind of social or organization do you sign up with as a government? Like here, I think you have 401c3s. There's ecclesial entities that you legally define your status before the government. In Italy, that's difficult, and they'll find ways if you haven't done it right. And if you haven't rented your church building in the right way, I have heard stories where they make it really difficult for you to keep meeting in your church building. Or they might make you pay back taxes. It's just subtle discrimination that happens, not at all levels of the government, but if somebody gets an idea in their mind that you're evangelical and they don't want you here, they can find a way to make it really uncomfortable for you. And so as you think about the heritage, it makes another form of Christianity almost unthinkable to as an option to consider. I met with a young man, Paolo, for again 7 years probably, every other week or so, studying the scriptures. And when we left Italy last fall, we've been in California for 2 months now, and we left Italy in October. We spent some time in the other part of the country. But I asked him how our conversations had impacted him. Had he learned anything? And he said to me, well, now I understand better what our church believes, and I'm more interested in learning more about the Roman Catholic Church. Because before, I'm trying to tell him, your church believes this. And he's like, oh, really? And he'd go study it. And he's like, I want to study it more. But that's just I'm like, wait a minute, we just studied the Bible together for 7 years. But that's just the natural progression in the Italian mind, that possibly even to arrive at a true knowledge of Christ, they have to run through all their understanding of the Roman Catholic Church, even historically, why they believe what they believe, before maybe they'll start seeing and actually caring about the contradictions. I remember my aunt in southern Italy one time telling me, as I've tried to share the gospel with her, she would just say, you don't understand, this is what our church believes, the Roman Catholic Church. You just have to understand that. This is our heritage. That's who we are. And you see this heritage obstacle come out oftentimes too. In Italy, it's a very matriarchal society. The mother is important. And so if you want to put in question Mary, many people, you can't touch Mary. You might get an emotional response, not a reasoned, intellectual, logical answer. You just can't touch Mary. That's just she's the mom, right? And so you see that come up. We face challenges in just getting somebody to cross the threshold into a church, to come and hear. I invited people to church for years, and maybe 3 or 4 times had people was successful to get people in. And so this is their heritage. And what this does also is it fuels a comfort level in living with contradiction in Italy. We all know, or if you've studied any part of Roman Catholic history, there's all kinds of contradictions in the Roman Catholic Church, like when they had 3 popes, or the immoral lives of the popes are well documented. And so this kind of, with this kind of hypocrisy, the Italians have grown very comfortable with this. I remember talking with a store owner in Assisi years ago. You can think of it, St. Francis of Assisi. It's one of the, they had an earthquake there a number of years ago, and I was talking to this store owner who was there for many years, and he said to me, they found skeletons of aborted fetuses in the convents, which would have been the aborted fetuses of the nuns who were pregnant because of the relationships that were happening between the priests and the monks and the nuns. And it's known in Italy that there are places where there's like underground passageways between convents and monasteries. And many Italians are aware of this hypocrisy. And yet what do? They set up a tourist shop in the city there, and they make money off the tourists coming to see Assisi and these great cathedrals. And so the Italians are very comfortable living in this kind of hypocrisy and these contradictions. It's part of, their life. I think that where I've seen this come out too is when I speak with people, and I'll try to explain to them the distance between what the Roman Catholic Church teaches and what the Bible teaches, is they'll say something like, "Oh, the church contradicts, the Roman Catholic Church contradicts the Bible? I'm not surprised. That's pretty normal." And then they just kind of go on with their life. It's like there's a devaluing of truth. There's a devaluing of truth. So I think what we've seen is friendships, hospitality reduces some of these barriers and preconceptions that we faced. Let me move on quickly to a second challenge that we faced in Italy. As we leave the heritage, then there's also what I would call Roman Catholic assumptions. Essentially, what this means is that when you speak with a Roman Catholic, because of its Christian heritage, so to speak, they already have concepts in their mind when you talk about things like sin and salvation and the Bible. They have certain concepts that you have to work to understand and clarify what you're actually talking about to make sure you're speaking the same language. Most Italians will generally assume the Pope is the head of the church, that the Bible is not for personal reading, and that they themselves are inherently good people, that they should go to the Mass, they should venerate Mary, and they might not ask questions about it. But you're going to have to work to explain to them that there's not big sins and little sins, that all sins are an offense to God. You're going to have to explain salvation to them, that in the mind of many Roman Catholics, salvation is a future event that they're working towards, that they hope they're ready to face. And the way we answer that is, well, I do believe in a future aspect of salvation. The Bible does talk about that day when we will be saved. But the Bible also talks about, for by grace you have been saved. And so with Roman Catholic friends, I've hammered all those texts that we know that define what God has done for us in salvation, past tense. He has brought you forth. You were born again by the living word. And so hammering and clarifying concepts like that, justification, sanctification. You'll get into some confusion about what the Bible is even. Sometimes they think the Bible is just like the 4 Gospels. And you're talking about Paul, like, well, that's not really the Bible. Or they'll think the 4 Gospels are not in the Bible. There's different kinds of confusion that you face. One time I remember talking with a man, trying to understand what he meant. He said he couldn't follow Christ because the Bible had changed over the centuries. I'm like, well, no, it hasn't. Like, I've been exposed to manuscript studies, and yeah, there's little variations here and there on insignificant details, but the Bible hasn't changed over the centuries. And so, well, yes, it has. I'm like, no, it hasn't. Yes, it has. No, it hasn't. And we kind of, what it came down to is that he was thinking, well, the Roman Catholic Church has changed, and that's true. They've changed over the centuries, and they also added to the Bible centuries later. At the time of the Reformation, they added the deuterocanonical books. And so that's what he meant, but we had to work to understand, what he was saying. And so those are things that just require dialogue. And sometimes you have to know and understand how the Roman Catholic Church arrived at its teachings. You have to have some knowledge of history. I would recommend, just as we move on from this one, that you need to have a long-term view in evangelizing Roman Catholics. It's a long process. I would recommend a book. You can find it on Amazon by Leonardo de Chirico, called Same Words, Different Worlds. Same Words, Different Worlds. He's a Reformed Baptist pastor in Rome, an Italian, and he has some great books on Roman Catholicism, and that will talk about some of these things. And let me just conclude here talking about, and I mentioned it in my chapter, Roman Catholic modernization is a final barrier. What do I mean by that? Well, modernization means that in recent decades, the Roman Catholic shift towards the outside world has changed to what we would call ecumenism. The Roman Catholic Church in the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s changed their approach, especially to Protestants and evangelicals, such that we're no longer the stigmatized as the anathematized brothers, but we're the separated brothers. And so they brought in their interest to trying to unify people from all over the globe. And you'll see things as you read and listen to Roman Catholics, you'll see them use phrases like faith alone, grace alone, Christ alone, which are phrases typically reserved for, or that we've used to define the Protestant evangelical biblical gospel, but they'll use those as well. I remember one time I was speaking with a priest about a mutual friend who had passed away, and the priest had done this wonderful Catholic funeral for him, hoping that he would be attain to the resurrection from the dead. And I knew this guy. I had been evangelizing him. He was an atheist. And so I went to the priest and I said, can you explain to me what your view is on atheism? Because this guy was an atheist. And he's like, oh, really? And he's like, well, you hope that maybe, by faith alone, he might be saved. And that's what he said to me. He said that maybe in the last minute he had faith. And so by faith, so he took my phrase and used it with me. So you have to, we face that. But if I can just summarize really quickly for you, just so you can understand the Roman Catholic Church as well. You have to understand the Roman Catholic Church is Roman and it's Catholic. And so historically, it kind of fluctuates between what we would call the Roman end of the spectrum and the Catholic end of the spectrum. The Roman end of the spectrum is its imperial nature, that historically it rose up in the presence of in the ashes of the Roman Empire. The Pope, in a certain sense, took the role of the emperor. And you see throughout history, through the Crusades, through the anathemas of the Council of Trent, Vatican I Council, them drawing a line in the sand and saying, we are the true church. If you're not here, you're outside. And so this would be a Roman imperialism that comes out in the Roman Catholic Church. But then there's the Catholic side of things, which is the word universal, in which we saw at Vatican II a shift to the more what I would call a pastoral posture, in which they're trying to embrace everybody as it's the Catholic end of the spectrum. So that's what's being done now in the name of ecumenism. But just I want to remind you that Romanism is still in the DNA of the Roman Catholic Church. And so when they say, hey, let's all be together, let's be unified, they're not thinking side by side. What theologians will say is, don't think cum Petro, think sub Petro. Cum Petro would be with Peter. Don't think that you're just with Peter, the Roman Catholic Church, but you're sub or under Peter. So they want to bring unity, but under the papacy, under the Roman Catholic Church. And so that's what Roman ecumenism is. It's not an effort to just be unified. It's an effort to unify everybody under Rome. And so you see both the Catholic element, but the imperial Roman element in that. And so ultimately what this can do is lead to a minimization of differences over foundational gospel truths, that things get blurry and there's not that big of a difference. I've actually found myself thinking at times, if an evangelical pastor can't figure out the difference between Roman Catholics and evangelicals at times, that you see sometimes here in the United States, how much more so for an Italian Roman Catholic in Italy who's trying to understand the true gospel? It's not simple. But what with ecumenism comes also opportunities for the gospel. People are more open to reading the gospel. People are more open reading the Bible. In fact, I have a Roman Catholic friend who said, well, we have to learn from you about the Bible because it's not part of our, Bible reading isn't part of our history. And so they would read the Bible with me. One time, three separate times in the months following the initial COVID pandemic, we had dialogues with Roman Catholic youth in our church through friendships we had established. They came in and we had 2-hour dialogues on why we don't pray to the saints and why they do. We talked about one time the Mass, the Eucharist, and the nature of the Eucharist. Another time we talked about biblical sexuality because they were asking questions. And so that the kind of the unifying ecumenical environment that's being created in the Roman Catholic Church today can also be used for fruitful conversations about the truth and the Bible. And I would just also say, when we're talking about modernization, while we talk about ecumenism on one hand within the Roman Catholic Church, you also have the challenge of secular science wreaking havoc in people's minds because they go to Bible class or religion hour in the school. They learn about Adam and Eve, and they learn about the Bible stories. And then in history and science, they're taught their myths, and that man is the result of millions of years of evolution. And I've talked with many people about this. So they get just confused. It creates a confusion that as you're trying to reach somebody, they're a strange mix of secular ideologies about man, his origin, and then also the Bible. And you're trying to sift through that. And sometimes you're just like, man, is there any way to get under this? And I just say that the strategies, we would do apologetic events like conferences on subjects. We did stuff on the Gnostic Gospels, on creation and evolution, on church history, just to invite people to come learn. We did a lot of hospitality, having people in our home to reduce hostilities. I would say anything you can do for a Roman Catholic to get an open Bible in front of them is the best approach, to read the scriptures with them. Ask them, how far can a doctrine get away from the scriptures before it's wrong, right? Because they'll say, well, the Bible kind of talks about Mary here or there, but what you're saying about Mary is quite distant from what the scripture says. We respect Mary. Mary was a wonderful woman of God. She knew the Bible. She submitted to God in a very difficult time. We'll say that to them. But what your church says about Mary is quite different than what the New Testament says. How do you justify that? And so those are the kind of conversations we would have. You could pray for Italy. That's kind of a summary of what my insert will say. Actually, it's more than what my insert says in the book. And what I want to do now is give you guys a 10-minute break to stretch. I know it's just after lunch. I'm a teacher, so I know some of you guys are like falling asleep. Totally cool. I get it. We're going to get back in here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in evangelism. Also with my friend Devraj, you're going to want to come and hear some of the things he has to say about evangelizing in the Philippines. Really interesting experiences. So take a quick 5-10 minute break, and I'll call you back in here.